Well, I do have a 6-point plan, and Congressman Murphy doesn't have a plan. Buy America is a slogan, it's not a plan. My plan is 6 points. It cuts taxes for the middle class. It cuts taxes on businesses so we're globally competitive. It rolls back overburdensome regulations. It cuts spending 1%, 1 penny out of every dollar. It empowers our workforce so that we are training our folks for the jobs that we have available. And lastly, it calls for a comprehensive energy policy that will continue to drill for our oil and our natural gas, while at the same time we develop our renewables, our wind, our solar, our geothermal. So I do have a comprehensive 6-point plan, and Congressman Murphy says that his is a work in progress. We've asked him to show us his plan. He hasn't, and so we don't have any opportunity to comment on it.
Thank you, Mrs. McMahon. Mr. Murphy, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Well, listen, it's just a fiction. I mean, it's made up. We have a jobs plan, but I have a jobs record, and that's what matters. And this idea to try to trivialize Buy American, talk to the workers at Ansonia Copper and Brass in Waterbury or Colonial Bronze in Torrington, who are going to be put out of work because our government is shipping jobs overseas. It's not a slogan to them. It's their livelihood. And we should take seriously the premise that when we send our taxpayer dollars to Washington, they should be used to create jobs here. That's real life for people that need to have a job.
Mrs. McMahon, 30 seconds.
Ironically, though, Congressman Murphy, both chances that you had to vote for your Buy America Act, you voted against it. So I'm not quite sure how that's an integral part of your jobs plan. And if you had a jobs plan, you've said rely on your record. Well, let's look back at your failed policies. Debt's almost doubled. Our deficit is increased. Unemployment's on the rise. These are not things that are part of an active jobs plan that are going to put our people back to work.
Thank you, Mrs. McMahon. Our next topic deals with something we all worry about, and that is taxes. And Chris Keating will ask that question first to Mrs. McMahon.
Mrs. McMahon, there's broad consensus that extending the Bush tax cuts for the middle class is a good idea. But there's sharp disagreement about whether the wealthy should benefit as well. How will you keeping taxes lower on the wealthiest Americans benefit the economy as a whole?
Well, in my jobs plan, I do call for a tax cut for the middle class. I would keep all of the other tax brackets in place, which means there would be no gain or loss for others. Even President Obama in 2010 said that we should not increase taxes when we're in a recession. Well, we're barely out of a recession. Our GDP growth was only 1.3%. I don't think that now is the time to raise taxes, but my plan does call for a tax cut for the middle class, and I'm the only one on the stage who has called for a tax cut for middle class. We need to make sure, though, that if our economy starts to turn around and we are improving, I would recommend that we pay more taxes. I'd be willing to pay more taxes as long as those taxes were used to pay down the debt and the deficit and not to continue with the runaway spending that we have in Washington.
Mr. Murphy, could raising taxes on the wealthy prove to be a disincentive for investment and growth?
Well, the centerpiece of Linda McMahon's economic plan is an extension of the Bush tax cuts on the wealthy. We know that tax cuts for the rich don't work because we tried it during the Bush administration. If tax cuts for the rich worked, then we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in today. And the question is just this. If we have $7 million to allocate somehow in our economy, does it make sense to give it to Linda McMahon in a new tax cut above and beyond current law? That's the truth. Or put it in the hands of middle class families? Does it make sense to give Linda McMahon another $7 million tax cut or lower class sizes in Willimantic? Does it make sense to give Linda McMahon another $7 million tax cut or try to put construction workers back on the job? There is a difference between us on this issue. I think we've got to get serious about deficit reduction. That's why I don't think we should reauthorize the Bush tax cuts for the very wealthy. Linda McMahon's plan is a recipe to absolutely explode the deficit, doing great harm to our economy.
Mrs. McMahon, you have 30 seconds.
Well, studies have shown that if your proposal of allowing all of the Bush tax cuts to go forward, except those in the upper income, we would lose 700,000 jobs. I don't think that's a plan to create jobs. My plan, which you've not characterized correctly, calls for keeping all of the tax levels the same except cutting taxes for the middle class. I get no tax cut. What you're talking about is increase of taxes across the board. You've voted to increase taxes on the middle class twice already. I would not do that.
Mr. Murphy, 30 seconds.
Well, here's what an economics professor here at UConn says about Lyndon McMahon's plan. He says that it would balloon the deficit at a phenomenal rate. Here's the numbers, and at some point arithmetic has to matter in this debate. Lyndon McMahon calls for $4.1 trillion in tax cuts, and her spending cuts are $360 billion. That's 12 times as many tax cuts as spending cuts. That's why we're in the mess we're in today, because we're not serious about deficit reduction. And if we don't, then this country is going to slip right back into a recession.